Welcome, everyone. If you don't know me, my name is Dr. Alfonso Ferguson. I'm a licensed mental health counselor in the state of New York, as well as Florida, and I'm a licensed professional counselor in the state of New Jersey. I am also a counselor educator, where I teach at the amazing, prolific Saybrook University, which is a predominantly online university, but I love it there. I like to describe us as a unicorn. And in addition to all those other things that I do, I am also a member of the CSJ committee, specifically a member of the research committee, where I am co-chair with the lovely and incomparable Suni. Hey, Suni. We are in for a treat today. We actually have some amazing speakers, and I can't wait for them to talk about not only their experience as counselors or counselor educators who hold Latino, Latina, Latinx identities, but also hear a little bit about the things, how they've navigated and been intentional on decolonizing research. So the title of our webinar is FUBU, How Counselor Educators Are Intentionally Decolonizing Research within their communities and also within their institutions. So before we jump in, I actually have a few housekeeping things for you all that I want you to be mindful of. I want you guys to remember, I want you guys to remember to keep yourself muted. Your videos can be on or off, during the webinar. Not a huge ask, but I personally love to see y'all faces. So if you have the capacity to turn your video on, I want to see y'all. Secondly, all questions are absolutely welcome throughout the event. You can just go ahead and place them in the chat. Between Suni and myself, we'll do our best to organize the questions. We'll leave a little bit of time at the end to have the speakers or presenters respond to some of those questions. So we'll be organizing throughout. And if we can answer some of those questions, we will. Thirdly, moderators, I've already gone through that. Lastly, for this particular webinar, you're able to earn 1 CEU. So at the end of the webinar, within maybe the last 5 minutes or so, we will post a link, the survey in the chat, where you'll be able to hop in and complete the survey to register to earn that 1 CEU. And as we've shared before, and we'll continue to share, we have several webinars coming up this academic year. So please stay tuned for what we have in stores for you all. So now I'm going to hand it over to our presenters, because I would love for you all to introduce yourself. And then we'll jump into some of the questions and conversations for today. Jasmine, would you like to kick us off?
Sure. So I'm honored and feel privileged to be here. A little bit about me. My name is Jasmine Eileen Santiago Atande. I value being able to bring in the identities and the community that I represent. So I'm Puerto Rican, I'm Colombian, I am a licensed professional counselor, approved clinical supervisor. I'm a daughter of parents who have some education and were not able to finish. And so I take a lot of pride in being able to be ABD right now, on way to finishing the dissertation. I am also a private practice practitioner, so I hold a private practice, educating and teaching other counselors in that practice, but also primarily serving Black, Indigenous people of color, so BIPOC. And I'm also bilingual, so bilingual. I speak Spanish and English. And that's a little bit about me.
Awesome. Thank you, Jasmine. Dr. Cineros?
Yes, great job. Thank you, Dr. Ferguson. You got it right. So good afternoon now. I'm actually in California, Sacramento, California. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm just so excited for the invitation. I am Dr. Daniel Cisneros. I use he, él pronouns, and I am located, as you could see, in Sacramento, California, and I'm an assistant professor in the amazing Sac State program for counseling. So Stingers up. Just really excited to be here, a part of this conversation. Just kind of really jazzed about it. And I love that some of our students are here and will be entering too. So shout out to all my students. And just to share a little bit about myself, I identify as Mexican American. My parents and 3 of my older siblings were born in Mexico and came here right a couple years before I was born. Have a huge family. I'll be talking about my family. I have 5 sisters, 4 brothers, middle child syndrome. in that space. I'm also a licensed professional clinical counselor, and I identify as part of the LGBTQ plus community. So I often talk about the intersection of being bilingual, Spanish speaking, queer, and how that intersects with all the parts that make up who I am. So I'll be sharing some of those pieces. So thank you all for the invitation. I'm jazzed.
Is jazz like a California term?
I think it is.
I,
People say I talk like a surfer. I don't hear it, but maybe I do.
I do. I'm from the East Coast, so we don't say jazz over here. So I'm from the Midwest to the East Coast. So I'm in New Jersey now. I'm at Lehman College. We just started our clinical mental health counseling program. So I'm the inaugural program coordinator, and we're so excited to be in the Bronx getting counselors educated to work in the Bronx. That's our biggest goal, or to stay in the urban environment, which is where I'm from. I'm from Chicago originally. I'm a Chicago Bears fan and a Cubby fan. I was a North Sider, and I'm a twin mom. I have 10-year-olds, boy-girl twins, and I'm one of the past presidents for Counselors for Social Justice. So it warms my heart to be invited and to participate and to see all the wonderful initiatives CSJ is doing, because that is part of the legacy I hope that I have cultivated and continue to encourage, I guess. And just to be, everyone who knows me knows I'm authentic, like Dr. Ferguson, and vulnerable. And my vulnerability today is I still struggle with identifying as a researcher. So when I was invited to this talk, I said, am I doing that? Am I decolonizing research? Like, what is that? I don't know, right? And again, I wrote a 300-page dissertation. I'm published in journals. I have an award-winning textbook. Like, I'm a writer, I'm a researcher, I'm a scholar, and yet I still struggle to own that identity. And I think that's, a lot of us have that because we come from families where my parents are from Puerto Rico. We didn't write at home, right? I mean, they didn't tell me read at bedtime. That wasn't something we did. It was eat, be clothed, and work. And that was it. Go to school, right? Go to school was the biggest thing. So that's a little bit about me. I am happy to be here and participate in this journey with you as you too embody your researcher identity.
Yes, 2 snaps for that. One of the things that, first of all, I'm excited because we're in the presence of greatness, not only legacy, but folks who are doing amazing things literally across the country. So this is really exciting to see. Dr. Flores-Locke, you've kind of already started talking about it, so I'm going to jump into you in our first question. I'm curious for you to speak a little bit more about what has motivated you to becoming a counseling researcher. And how has that contributed to your development in cultivating your researcher identity?
Yeah, well, I mean, to get a PhD, I had to do research. Sure. Right? That was the honest truth of it. Again, I never grew up identifying I'm going to be a researcher one day, right? That isn't one of those careers that we are told we can do or that exist. So I jokingly say it was my PhD program. But seriously as well, the PhD program was very good at cultivating the identity of us as researchers. And so not only after finishing my dissertation and publishing that and getting it into journals, I also continued on that path because, like we know, there's a lack of representation of our stories. And I'm a storyteller, and I want those stories to be amplified. So that's really my commitment to research is if I'm up in the PhD level and in the ivory tower, as they call it, even though Lehman College in the Bronx is not an ivory tower, but there's still the element, there is still the element, we're in a gated campus. There still is an element of we're in a protected elite environment. And so again, bringing this information and knowledge and my expertise to communities that we serve is my passion. And really, it helps me also maintain my connection to my community, right? To my roots, to know where I come from, and to really remain humble in I don't have the answers. I don't know what the lived experiences of Latina women with infertility is. That's my research question. I have to go ask, I have to go find out. I'm one of them, but my experience is not the same as others, right? So that's really, I think, what has kept me going is that aspect of representation, not only as a Latina, but as a working mom, to publish and to research and to show like we can be scholars as well as raise children, as well as be successful in our career. All of those elements are important for me and for those coming up, right? Who are looking at us and saying, if they can do it, I can do it too.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that, Dr. Flores-Locke. And before I even jump in and hear from other folks, because I think this is really important to acknowledge, and not only was I excited for this webinar because of the amazing panelists, but I was excited because today's the first day of Hispanic Heritage Month. Right. And so what better way to kick the month off than to have folks who identify as Hispanic or Latinx or Latino, Latina to be able to like have this conversation within our counseling community as to why it is important for them to be here, as well as to do research within the communities that they belong to. So thank you so much for that, Dr. Anna Flores-Locke. What about others?
I guess I'll jump in. I want to echo the sentiment of what Dr. Flores-Locke is saying, is this personal struggle with identifying as a researcher, but also finding that I can honor the respect, the curiosity, and the interest that I have in many of the topics that contribute to research in the Latino Latinx community. So that I can embrace a bit more, but also recognizing that's part of the growth and development, is seeing myself in terms of being able to say, well, it started with clinical research and practice, and now it's developing into more research beyond just dissertation at some point. My motivation behind this identity is both personal and professional. So growing up and being in spaces where national news or media was giving a lot of stigma and kind of blasphemizing my community and misrepresenting it in ways that I felt were just crazy. Like, wow, people are really speaking about this as though they're in the community. And it was a lot of outsiders. And then I experienced and saw, as I became a counselor and a clinical practitioner, I was learning about theories, and I was also learning about diagnoses that were misrepresenting my community, and really from providers who were studying them and creating a narrative that didn't truly understand. And so I thought, okay, there's a lot here that is being misunderstood. And I also experienced feeling misunderstood, whether it was by racial ambiguity or by pronouns or by name. And so there were just experiences that I felt were not truly being captured. And then I started to read about other scholars and other educators in the field who were saying some of the things that I was feeling and giving me language. And I got really excited. I was like, whoa, this is amazing. I started finding other publishers who were a little bit outside of counseling too. There was a little bit more advancement in psychology or other fields that were related. And so I started to find leaders and counselor educators who were in some way speaking to things that I was experiencing that I didn't quite have language for. And so part of my dissertation is also examining leadership, especially in our field as counselor education. And so part of what has contributed to that motivation is the personal identity, academically wanting to contribute to the gap that existed in that literature already, and then also wanting to push the needle forward and saying, well, there's going to be other individuals who are also Latino or want to represent and serve the Latinx or Latino community. And so I want to be a part of that conversation and educate and inform. So that's what's been my motivation and helped support some of the work I've been doing.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Yeah, and I'll jump in because I love the conversation, the way that it's flowing, and hearing these thoughts makes me think very similarly of the invitation. Like I hear the both of you say, like, I'm a researcher. And I think being Mexican American or Latina, I think the cultural humility piece of that makes us sometimes not appreciate and not be able to fully accept, yes, I am a researcher, right? And to share a little bit of my story, I never in my wildest dreams thought I would get a PhD. I never even thought I would get a master's degree when I was young. Growing up in project housing when I was younger with 9 brothers and sisters, super poor, right? Not ever knowing anybody who got a bachelor's degree, let alone PhD or master's. I thought that isn't for me, right? I'm never going to be able to accomplish that. That's for others. That's not for me. But when I think about it, in terms of my identity and my researcher, and then also my passion for social justice, I often share that for me, I'm going to tell you all a quick little story. It all started for me in 11th grade. First day of 11th grade. I remember this plain as day. First day, you have your classes. I walked into my 5th period advanced calculus class. So I'm walking in, just to give you a little backstory. I was dressed in like my regular hip hop clothing. Probably I was wearing a backwards red hat with some lugs that I was kind of sporting, probably listening to Tupac. I walked into my advanced calculus class, and the first thing the teacher said, teacher is a white male, older white male, he said, "You're in the wrong class. Go talk to the counselor." He didn't look at my schedule. He didn't ask me for anything. He didn't know my name. He just made that assumption, you're in the wrong class because of how you look. And that always has stuck with me in terms of what I need to do. And it's kind of one of the reasons that I continue to want to prove people wrong, because I did belong in that class. He didn't know that I was a nerdy 4.0 student just based on the way that I looked, right? And so that kind of inspired me to continue that journey. And years later, when I was in my own doctoral program, I specifically remember that memory came back to me when I was sitting with my advisor. And when my advisor was talking me through my dissertation process, I kind of was saying to him, I said, I don't think anybody really wants to hear the story that I'm sharing, or this is not research. My advisor, I recall, he did an amazing job. And he said, you know what, Daniel? He said, the story that you have to tell, because you identify as Mexican American and queer, there's not many folks that could tell your story. And he said, we need you to write that story. We need you to be there for other people who don't get to hear it. And that really inspired me. And I think in terms of my wanting to help others in their research and their journey, it's parts of the story that stick with me. So I think it's a great question. Just wanted to share that quick story of my process.
Thank you so much for that story, Dr. Cisneros. I think one of the biggest things that I pulled out of your story is like the importance of representation, right? Especially, I have a similar story, but it ain't about me, so we won't go into it. But especially how important it is, how impactful our formative years can be. Whether it's sometimes it's not about what people said, it's what they didn't say, and or it's how they said it that really sticks with us, that make us feel like either we don't belong or we shouldn't be here, but how important and impactful it is for us to be here right now. Absolutely.
100%. Yes.
Thank you so much for sharing. It makes me think about one of our other questions. As you guys, again, I know we all struggle with owning our researcher identity, but as you guys step into your researcher identities, I'm wondering if there are things that are important for scholars, researchers of today, researchers of tomorrow, need to know when they're looking into conducting research within the Latinx community. What are some of the do's and don'ts?
If no one else is going to jump, I'll jump in with the neophyte lens. It would be cultural humility, and I feel like that can't be stressed enough. It is a matter of being able to be curious, but also be able to be collaborative. And so even in the very first work that I had done, it was in understanding the differences in the terms and the embracing of Latinx, Latina, or Hispanic. And it's very timely because we're in Hispanic Heritage Month, but then you have some folks who have a response and a reaction against being reduced to particular terms that they don't resonate with. So that cultural humility piece in terms of being able to be open and have conversation, but also give space for individuals to identify and bring their own voice to the table. and the collaboration of, you don't put the total responsibility on your participants or on the community to educate and teach you. You do a little bit of due diligence too. And so that means you either learn the profile of the participants or a little bit about what you're asking, or you do some preliminary, not just the lit review, but really put intention and effort into the questions so that the ownness of that is being shared on learning.
And I think I want to jump on that because I love, Jasmine, where you're going with this, and what you just stated, because I love the idea, kind of similar to Jasmine, what you just shared, is really calling people in versus calling them out, right? Everybody has their own way that they would like to identify their own process. For some people, Hispanic might be something that they really connect with and resonate, right? For other people, Latinx might be what they resonate, right? It's not wrong or right. It's just everybody's a little different. Me personally, just to share, I really like the term Latine for myself because of the queer identity. And I think the process of it, and somebody who shares a really good process of it, is Dolores Huerta. She really says that for her, Latinx doesn't do it because the X is still a form of colonization. And so to remove that X, right, and to remove that oppressive components of it is kind of her vibe. And the way that the Latine sounds, it's even Spanish sounding in language. And so those are some of the key parts that everybody's just a little different, and we just have to, right, call in versus calling out. And just to go back to the question a little bit, one of the big things, especially because it's Hispanic Heritage Month, that I really think about counselor education, mental health, and research is we are trained, right, in our master's programs and even in our doctoral programs to learn just the traditional Western methods of counseling, right? We hear about CBT until we're blue in the face. We hear about Aaron Beck and Carl Rogers. Don't get me wrong, they're great, but that's not the only folks that we need to hear about. I often share examples of, do we ever hear about psychologists or therapists from Latin America? We rarely don't. It wasn't until I was in my own doctoral program that I heard for the first time about Martín Baró, who really is one of the most influential psychologists in El Salvador. And I really like how he describes the approach to counseling. And he says, specific to research, he talks about how research shouldn't be just for us to examine what's going on. Research should be for us to transform and change what we don't see in terms of the oppressive pieces of it. And I think just not just because it's Hispanic Heritage Month, but I invite folks, counselor educators, and also students to take some time to learn about some of the more influential Latine counselors, psychologists, and therapists, because there's a lot out there that we're never taught. And it really sucks. It really sucks when in my third year of my doctoral program, I first learned about them. And I did kind of the learning on my own because of my research. I just thought such a missed opportunity. So many professors that I had that not once told me about this. So empowering ourselves to kind of do that.
Mm-hmm. And I definitely need that list from you, Dr. Cisneros. And I imagine you're incorporating that into your course, right? We have a textbook and then we have the supplement with like, this is actually the really good stuff is over here. But I wrote a textbook, but still. The inviting in piece I want to touch on, because that's one way that I really embody my researcher identity, is by bringing in every team that I have that has written with me has been from diverse identities, from Brazil to inner city New York. And so I'm intentional about bringing them in because I was brought in as a junior scholar, and now I have to do the same. And part of that process is helping them battle that imposter syndrome, that I'm not good enough. Why are you asking me? Right? I'm not a writer. Again, the identity of even being a writer. So part of my work is mentoring them in that process, which is, you are a writer. What you have to say is important. That's why I asked you to be on this chapter. And I'm going to guide you through it. And what I do is, and this is, I guess, my suggestion for you who are writing and bringing in students or people from the community to write with you, is I simply tell them, share your story, like write as if you were conversing with me. You're in the sala, you're telling your story, write it like you speak, right? Write it as if you're conversing. And that eases that anxiety of like, it has to be a scholarly written piece, right? Because again, we have that notion of what that is versus what I write doesn't meet that. And so when we start at that place, then we can grow, right? Then we can adjust it and meet the criteria, because we still have to play the game, meet the criteria of our editors who want to publish it. And also with advocacy, because I don't go down quietly. So if they give me feedback, I'm ready with that research to counter what they're saying, so we can still have that voice that we want to amplify. So that's what I would share, is the element of being intentional about who you're inviting to be on your team, and then retaining them through that mentorship, which is starting with, you are a writer, I believe in you, talk to me like we're in the sala and share your story. And that's what we want to share. And then we'll get it into the format that the publishers want, and you will be published. And you will put that on your resume, right? And I'm very strong about that. You will finish with me, and you will get that pub, and you will put it on your resume.
I know that's right. So I'm really loving this conversation. Part of it is, and I like to always say, my brain is on fire because it's so much exciting, like gems you guys are dropping. I'm about to create me a gem garden or something. But we planting and dropping seeds here. I love the conversation we're having around, it feels like decolonizing research, or even the way we do academic writing or scholarship, right? I love Dr. Cisneros, what you've shared around like Latinx counselors and therapists who we haven't like learned a lot about in our very westernized approach to teaching or counselor education. But I also am really leaning in on what you're sharing, Dr. Ana Flores-Locke, around the publication process. I hear you saying, hey, be authentic, be who you are, but also we got to play the game. And so I'm curious to hear from you all, and anyone can kick this off, right? What has been your experience in publishing research to intentionally decolonize the academy, if at all? Like, how do you play the game?
I'll share what I did, right? Or what I am doing. So it links with identity again, right? Because when you're new and you first graduate, you're like, wow, okay, I wrote that dissertation, I'm done, right? A lot of us are fatigued at that point. You're like, I'm not writing anymore, right? And then if you have good mentors, they remind you, you got to get that published, right? You got to get that published. So I remember starting out in, and I wanted to do like the high caliber journals in our profession, right? That should be our goals. That is the places, the tables we want to be at. And so I know I started at one, and the feedback I got was, it was heartbreaking when you first get that first review and you're the solo author and you're like, oh my God, I spent 2 years writing that dissertation and I want to share the details now. And you're sending me this. To me, it felt like trash, right? Like I was really hurt. So I start with that piece because, right, we're counselors and we process the emotion and my own insecurity as a writer and a scholar. And then I got my mentorship and I spoke it, worked it through. And where I came to was, okay, take the information. Let's not call it trash. Let's call it inspirational information. How can I use that information to now help guide me when I put forth my proposal again? And I did change to another journal. So a piece of this is selecting journals that are affirmative to your belief system. And so that helps some. And then also taking that feedback and saying, okay, how do I adjust? How do I write to speak to what they're saying and still have my voice and still amplify what I want to say? So that was kind of my process, was like, I did start out on one journal. That feedback brought me to another journal and my revisions. And then it brought it to where I have 2 publications out of the one that I started with, because that was part of the issue. It was too much in one article. So I got 2 pubs out of it, which was good. But I think that reframe, right, that mindset of first it hurts, right? And we don't want to hear it. And then I took it as inspiration, as constructive feedback to my mentors and said, okay, help me. How do I adjust this? And what journal do I go to now?
I am hearing and smiling to all of that, Dr. Floreslock, because part of what has been my journey is first and foremost being inspired and knowing my why. So just to kind of give credit and highlight, like Dr. Flores' dissertation, I remember reading that and being excited. There was a Latina, there was somebody else who was in the field and doing the work and finding the language. And I think being able to see it done, like seeing some of those trailblazers that come before us and knowing like, okay, I see that, I know it can be done. So let me find my process. And part of what's helped my process, not just being the inspired, but also the why. Okay, so I know that I need to be part of this conversation. I know that I need to be at the table to have some of these insights that aren't being discussed enough in the literature. And so wanting to contribute to other leaders and their work and their scholarship, and then seeing that it's being done in other fields. So I was inspired in being able to attend other conferences, critical race theory conferences, and saying, I'm drawing that in and bringing that into counseling. And when I saw that Dr. Floreslock had did that with Latin critical theory, I was like, yes, somebody else has done it. Okay, so it gave me inspiration. Critical friends is also really important. So I try to be intentional on surrounding myself with other voices and identities that can challenge me, that can hold me accountable, and then I could just share my concerns, my thoughts, my worries, like, how can I work through this? What do you think about that? And getting that information. Like I come from a collectivist culture, a rich tapestry of other people that have been there and done things that I can learn from and draw from. So I try not to operate in a silo, because that's also how we end up in burnout. And that's also how we end up not finishing. The other last 2 things, and Dr. Floreslock mentioned this, was mentors. So at the time, and this is something that I also realized, like, okay, I have to be at the table. For many years, I did not have other Latina, Latinx, Latin, and educators. I didn't see it. It wasn't around me. If I didn't go and intentionally look for it, it was just not an experience that I got to benefit from. So that being said, I was able to find other mentors that were just really pouring into me, and they were just so open and allowing me as a junior scholar to even participate. And so I think mentorship is vital. It's important. It gives us the fuel and it gives us the guidance, especially when we feel like we're not being seen or not visible. And then the other thing I'll say is discipline. And that has taken me time to figure out my process. So for me, it might be, I'm just going to add, getting a paragraph done for this week, or I'm going to add just reviewing the really harsh feedback of what just got sent to me. Or for myself right now, dissertation is the priority. So it's being able to piece down, along with other things that are really, that I'm passionate about, where am I carving out the time? Because we can really have a lot of love and attention for something, but if we don't have the discipline, then it might fall by the wayside.
And just to add to that, because I love, Jasmine, that you just talked about mentorship, right? And mentorship is so key, especially if we're at universities where there are no professors that look like us, right? That mentorship, that support that you could give is just really huge. It makes me really think of a recent moment I had with some of my students. You all know I teach in Sacramento, and I teach in a predominantly Hispanic serving institution. In one of my classes that I'm teaching, 80% of my students are Latinx, Latina, or Hispanic. And I had a aha moment just very recently. I was grading one of my students' papers, and I knew that the students speak Spanish. We both have talked Spanish before. And in my grading of the comments, I wrote my comments in Spanish. Not really just thinking, I just thought, like, we connect. I'm going to write this comment in Spanish. A couple of days later, the student comes up to me, kind of in an emotional manner, and said, I have to tell you something. You commented and graded my paper in Spanish. She's like, that meant the world to me. She's like, I took a picture of that and I sent it to everybody I knew. She's like, now I'm in year 6 of my schooling. I've never once had a professor that looked like you, that spoke Spanish. And that representation piece is just huge. Sometimes we forget about that, but it makes such a huge difference. And it leads me to just think about mentorship and the importance of it, that even if you don't have it, find it somewhere else. And that just makes me think of, we recently had a group of researchers that I worked with. We published an article on anti-racist mentorship. And we specifically outlined the steps of how you could do that through a model. Even if you don't have individuals at your university, you could do outreach and find them in other spaces, right? And then that article that we got published, just we were talking about collectivistic community. We did it as a part of a community. The researchers were Black, Latinx, LGBTQ plus, South Asian, and getting everybody's input into it, because we are collectivistic, and the better we do it and the stronger we are together. And we didn't give up. And just thinking about the research process, originally the first, I'm not going to tell you the name of the first journal that we tried to submit to, but they tried to get us to re-edit our model in a different way that we didn't approve of, that we really thought is not anti-racist. They even had a challenge with the use of the term anti-racist, kind of saying, could you tone it down a little bit? And for us, that was an eye-opener. And you will see that sometimes you do have to edit and modify to get it through. But if it fits against your values and what you believe in and your passion and your social justice, I say stick to it. And we're glad that we did, because the journal and that article is now in the journal that it was supposed to be in. So just wanted to give that.
And I also want to add, Dr. Cisneros, you mentioned anti-racist mentorship. Being able to be really cognizant, because some of the mentors who have been able to pour into me who aren't Latino or Latinx are Black scholars and Southeast Asian scholars. And something that I always appreciate, and I say every time I meet them, is their cultural curiosity, and also being able to push me in ways to look at other individuals that either they can connect me to, or that they can point out and say, well, you know, you've mentioned and you've talked about some of this literature. Who are you connecting with that can speak to this, that is a more of a content expert? And so it's the knowingness of when I can support you as another ally or as another person of, you know, Black or brown identity, but also when I need to point you in the direction of finding spaces where you might have more of that nuance of what you're specifically looking at. Because we might not have that in our own institutions or in our own spaces. So having that be reminded to us by our mentors with other identities, I think is really important. So thank you. That was a reminder to me.
And not only scholars and those also in the profession like we are, but those not in the profession, even including our ancestors. My now deceased great aunt, she was a writer. She was a philosopher. I have the gifts that I have for writing and intuition and social justice from her. So I actually have her picture like in my writing space to inspire me. And so that is on my heart now as we were talking, because it's not only those that are alive and those that are writing or doing scholarship, it's also our ancestors. Like when I call upon her in my soul and then I write something and then I have the courage to not be censored like she must have been, that's what fuels me, right? That's what I just hold on to, right? Like that gives me that courage, despite what the narrative out there might be, is like, no, she was censored for so long and I'm not going to allow it anymore. Like I'm going to use my voice as her legacy to carry on like the message that she wants to be out there.
Awesome. Thank you, guys. I will say, as you all were sharing, I had chills. I had moments that felt like I was very close to tears, but I self-identify as a thug and thugs don't cry. So I wasn't about to do that here. But I mean, I know we're approaching our final time, our final minute. So I wanted to like take an opportunity to, my final question for you all is, if any, what tools do you guys utilize to combat white supremacy in academia? And how do you utilize those tools to amplify not only your research, but minoritized communities?
That is a loaded question in these last few
Very
minutes.
loaded.
I'm going to try not to take up too much space because I'm excited to hear what the other thoughts are. First, I will say grounding my literature, my work, my thoughts in theories that represent the work that I'm already interested in doing. So stepping outside of the Eurocentric frameworks that we continuously see are being upheld, and also being able to have the hard conversations. So if I'm going to have these conversations, not only in my critical race, groups and critical friend groups with my participants, I also need to get comfortable with being uncomfortable. So making sure that that's a space that I'm allowing for myself, debriefing, journaling, because it's heavy. It's an emotional task for scholars who are Black, who are brown, who are on the receiving end of the oppression and the stigma and the discrimination that gets overlooked. And so I give myself, like you said, Dr. Ferguson, you're a thug and you self-identify so you don't cry, but I give myself the time to have the emotional space that I need to, because it's labor and emotionally time intensive.
And I'll jump in next. I love this question. And just because we're talking about decolonization, right? When we think about that, decolonize means to free from the cultural oppression that was faced. And because this is FUBU, for us, by us, we also have to take it back. There are certain things that were taken away from us, from our ancestors, and we have to not be afraid to take those things back. One of the things that I often share about it is decolonizing seems like so heavy and so stressful, right? We also have to decompress from that years of oppression, the year of taking things away from us that belong to us. It's just going back to my story about math, right? And calculus. Many times in research, we are kind of told we're just going to stick to qualitative, right? Because our ancestors love storytelling. Our ancestors love that process of qualitative. Our ancestors were also really good at math. You think of the Aztecs and the Mayans, quantitative is also for us. And that's one of the reasons I specifically decided in my dissertation process, I was going to take the hard road and do something quantitative, because I wanted to prove that stupid calculus teacher wrong, right? I needed to take back my numbers. And I just think about that. What has been taken from us that we could decolonize and take back? What is our cultural capital? What do I have? What are my strengths? The strengths that we have is our language. We're bilingual, we're multicultural, right? We have our dichos that we say, our sayings, right? How could we take those pieces back, and how could we use them to empower and strengthen our community? And the way we do it is collectively. It's not just the Latinx community, it's all of us working together in conjunction.
And I would have to say I'm one of those that, I'm married to a white man. So I live in a household that's always has wonderful conversations around the dinner table about this. And so I'm from this perspective of we need both and, right? And I think what's that? The Sum of Us, I think, is that book that talks about that white supremacy is harming white folks just as much as it's harming us, right? In different ways, not to minimize one or the other, but to kind of unify us in this fight towards equity and social justice. And I hope that now that I know that movement is happening. I mean, I know my kids are learning certain new narrative. And so when they take over the world, that generation, I hope, will start breaking down this system that we have to fight against. And it's going to take both, or all of us, really. It can't just, it can't just be us. So I hold on to that piece as well, that we have to bring in our white folks as well to heal from all of this oppression we've been under.
First of all, I've been over here rocking. I'm in the process of healing as we speak. Thank you guys so much for those questions or those responses. There's so many things that you guys have shared. There's so many gems that you guys have dropped. So many seeds you've planted today. I'm still sitting with some of the do's and don'ts and important things to be mindful of if we are going to work with or do research with marginalized communities, specifically the Latinx, the Latina, Latino community, the Hispanic community, right? Being mindful and doing our due diligence on understanding who that particular person, how they may self-identify, or what language is appropriate for them, right? Calling folks in instead of calling people out, right? You know, understanding kind of like the roots they come from, their historical narratives. If we're going to like go into these communities and share space with these communities in request or ask for information from them. So I'm taking a lot from this, but I definitely want to create some space to open it up for some of our attendees. If you all have any questions, I think a couple of questions came up in the chat, but between myself, Suni, Dr. Smith, we've been starting to like answer some of them, but I want to open it up for you all. Do you all have any questions for our panelists? Was there anything that jumped out for you that you thought was impactful and want to expand on maybe? We got some time. What y'all thinking? Give it to us, Mr. Hicks.
Hey, I just had a quick question. Thank you all. This was a phenomenal panel. Beyond the phenomenal work that you all are doing to not only increase diversity within the profession and recruit diverse students into our profession, what other strategies can programs around the country sort of do to increase diversity within that you think particularly recruits and increases the number of Latino, Latinx, Latina, Hispanic students in counselor education?
I don't know if I'm jumping ahead of other folks, but something that immediately comes to mind that I've been curious about myself, and I've seen more programs are doing this, is having curriculums around bilingual education. So when we provide therapy rooted in more Eurocentric theories and language, there's a lot that doesn't transfer over. So being a bilingual provider, there's certain words that have more meaning without an actual word for it. So even when we think about trauma, like that's not a word that is in the language, in the Spanish language. So we have to discuss that more, and being able to have curriculums that are centered in that bilingual providing. So I know they exist. I've had the privilege of being able to talk to a few folks who are in such programs, but they're not as many, and being able to include the other types of work that we're doing in terms of other psychologists and other theorists who, like critical race theorists, liberation psychology, even pulling from other disciplines like Paulo Freire, like being able to really integrate into providing culturally responsive education to our Latino, Latinx counselor educators, because we're not quite receiving that in some of the ways that mainstream CACREP accredited programs are.
And just to add to that piece, I love that you brought up, Jasmine, the bilingual piece, right? It's really difficult if you have supervisees who are working with Spanish-speaking clients, yet they don't have any supervisors who they could process with. And it's such a disservice. And I think one of the key things that we're trying to do at my university is we're trying to make it more accessible for our students to be able to serve bilingual populations. We have a pilot program that we're doing here in Sacramento with the Mexican consulate, where we're providing a new program. Well, it's not new anymore. It's in year 3 almost, but we're working with the Mexican consulate to provide free therapy for those that are undocumented and don't have access to counseling. We provide up to 5 to 7 counseling sessions so that they could get a sense of what counseling is. And even the term that we use, we call it pláticas, right? So they're getting a sense of what it is so that they feel comfortable. And what we're seeing is that after those 5 sessions, they're wanting to stay longer, right? So we've been working with a community agency, and now I'm trying to bring that in more into the work with the university. So hopefully including internships in the future. So that's one of the pieces.
So I see we have a question in the chat. I'll go ahead and read it for us. This is from Alexis Blake. For a counselor just starting out, what books or resources would you recommend for working with Latinx/Hispanic clients?
My number one recommendation, if you could only choose one book, my biggest recommendation would be Advancing Social Justice Through Clinical Practice.
Mm,
Writer is Alderondo. I'll pop that into the chat. That one is broken up into like chapter formats where it's actually a good read. So that's my number one recommendation I'll share.
awesome. Awesome. Anything else from the other panel? Okay.
I was gonna say books written by the community, right? So looking for books written from the Latina authors. And one thing about Lehman College in the Bronx is we have a great library that does house, they just came out with children's books from Caribbean authors. So looking for those authors and reading those stories, that's gonna give you some insight into the culture, and it's from their voice.
I borrow a lot from other disciplines as well. So I don't just limit it to counseling, and I don't just limit it to what's been published and what we see in our journals. So sometimes I like to look at psychology. I like to look at, I'm knee deep right now in dissertation, so my mind is all in leadership. But I like to look at other fields and disciplines like social psychology. I like to look at education and other critical race theorists. Like that's really where I draw from. So not limiting yourself to, I mean, depending on what it is that you're trying to study, but not limiting yourself to just what's been written in our field.
Awesome. Thank you, folks. Dr. White, I see your hands raised.
Yes, thank you, Suni, for pinning me because Dr. Ferguson was not going to call on me, which is fine. Hey, y'all, how you doing? First, I want to say, Jasmine, I was tickled really quickly when you talked about trauma, not really being in the word, because I was just talking to, we know, Triana, and I was asking her, because we're doing a presentation together, I said, how do you say trauma in Spanish? She said, trauma. And I was like, oh, okay. But my question is, speaking of Triana, is coming from a community where there are a lot of Latin Hispanic folks of different backgrounds, I often hear that the experiences of Afro Latinos is very different, not just within academia, but even within the community, and that their needs oftentimes differ as well, and the issues they have around identity and mental health differ as well. And so I'm just wondering if you could spend just maybe a couple minutes, because I know we're towards the end, speaking to that and how we can, in the spirit of intersectionality and understanding those nuances, be prepared to tackle that, not just in our clinical spaces, but also in our education spaces and research spaces as well.
Yes, I just felt compelled to jump right at that because it's part of what I'm writing right now while I'm addressing and looking at the intersection of, so what you're discussing, the Afro-Latin population, colorism, mejorando la raza, which is a lot of times in our community looking at why we're not having more diversity in the Spanish representation. So a lot of times what's also happening is we have more of the light skinned folks who are having conversations about the community, and we're not really highlighting the other part, the intersecting identities of our community, specifically Black Latin folks, because we're not identifying not only skin color, but also the intersecting identities of non-binary. We're not having enough conversation around other areas where they're being siloed, or where they're being misrepresented, or where they're being served. And so thank you, Dr. White, for being able to point that out. I think part two is being able to recognize that just because we're having conversation, like I bring this up a lot of times, is my own privilege and skin color privilege, depending on racial ambiguity, what I look like, how I'm dressed, etc. Whereas my Afro Latinx folks, brothers and sisters, wouldn't have that privilege, and they would be experiencing not only, they have to kind of rationalize and justify a lot of different identities by way of how they identify, and also internalized whiteness. So what that looks like if they're checking off boxes, or folks are having questions for them about being Latinx or about being Hispanic, and this having to defend self, or on the flip side, not identifying as Black at all. So those are different experiences that have been in the literature and also need to be honored when we're doing work with individuals and also when we're teaching our counselor educators.
Now I'm just being a little mindful of time. I know we have about 2 minutes, 2.5 minutes, but I just want to bring it to our attention that I have posted the survey link in the chat for those of you who are looking to accrue some CEU hours. And we'll jump to Jennifer. I see your hand up. This will be our last question before we wrap, okay? I see you, Betsy. I'm gonna try and squeeze you in, friend.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for your time and your stories to our panel, and also to CSJ for hosting this afternoon. One of my areas of curiosity in terms of really honing in that research identity is how to offer those spaces for actual mentorship or actually having research networks. I know that there may be a space in ACES for Researchers Network, but considering that we have maybe perhaps different topics of interest, have you guys thought of maybe starting something up? Maybe I'm asking for a friend, maybe I'm asking for me, but just putting it out there. I was curious.
You know what happens when you ask, Jennifer? You get volunteered to do it.
Or voluntold, right?
Voluntold, that's it.
I would like to share regarding that question, Jennifer. That's a great question. And specifically, I know I'm on the West Coast. I'm in California. But so for our Western chapter of ACES, WACES, we have a DEI committee that is actually focused on exactly what you just asked. So our committee, we have a subcommittee that I am on the committee regarding mentorship. And we're putting together a workshop specifically on anti-racist mentorship. So that's coming in the end of October, early November. And so with that, we're going to give specific strategies. We're going to do a storytelling workshop specific to mentorship and how we create the communities that you're just describing and asking for. I know it's WACES on the West Coast, but it will be open. So I just wanted to plug that, and I could share it once that flyer and invite comes out.
If you can share it, that'll be great. Sounds like a great opportunity for the other divisions to like take notes. I think that's great. Thank you for sharing. Dr. Smith, I know you had your hand raised before we wrap up. I don't know if there's something you wanted to share or you had a question.
Oh, Dr. Ferguson, I'm sorry. Go ahead. There was someone else that was before me. Go ahead, let them go. I'm
Okay.
good.
Okay, great. So we're at time. I think it was Betsy was in the chat. She was asking for contact information for the panelists. And I know some of you all have responded. So if you haven't, please feel free to do so. Y'all, this has been great. This has been fun. I feel full. I don't know about y'all, but I feel full. I ate well. So thank you all for the meal. So I wanted to leave you all with some closing remarks. Again, not only am I grateful for this experience and I feel full, I'm really grateful for the panelists who not only devoted their time and shared their wisdom, but y'all dropped some gems and grew some plants or drop some seeds to grow some plants, but I've already been eating from the fruits of your labor. So thank you so much. Thank you for our attendees who were able to show up and spend their lunch or their early Friday afternoon with us. Really, really, really grateful for you guys. As I mentioned earlier, the survey link is in the chat. I posted it at in my time, at least Eastern Standard Time, 3:55. So you guys should be able to go in and register for your CEUs there. But I wanted to also share information on upcoming webinars we have. CSJ is always putting out webinars, so be on the lookout for that. You can find information on upcoming webinars on our website, as well as on our social media outlets. So please feel free to join and come in. We'll be having more of these kind of panel conversations, especially as it pertains to FUBU, for us, by us. And so I'm looking forward to kind of seeing you all there. If you have other questions or you're interested in joining or being a part of CSJ National, or you're interested in creating a membership within your institution or organization, definitely reach out to us. We'd be more than happy to support you. Anyone on the staff or on the committee or on the board will be more than happy to answer your questions. If you guys are interested in becoming a part of the research committee, holla at me. That was my attempt of trying to whisper. Anyways, I won't keep you guys too long. I'm big on time, and we're 2 minutes over, but thank you all so much for an awesome experience, and I'm really grateful to have you guys. Bye, y'all.
Thank you. Hey, Jasmine. Bye.
Bye.
Sunny, can you stop recording?